Our film starts with the librarian, Flynn, arriving at a fancy party. We then find out that it's an auction and his job is to prevent someone from winning an ancient vase. Unfortunately, in the process, he gets a phone call from his girlfriend Katie, who cries about how he missed their date. We then get a running joke where whenever he mentions a number while on revolving conversations with Katie about being late to their date and his boss Charlene about not overspending at the auctioneer takes it as a bid. He wasn't supposed to go over £30,000, but it ends with him winning the vase for £1,000,000, which makes Charlene faint. He tells Katie he'll meet her in 15 minutes. Once he gets the vase, he breaks it and finds something called the Philosopher's Stone inside. Side note, the vase wasn't that small, so not sure how anyone didn't see the stone in there. Anyway, the villain shows up and attempts to steal the stone from him, resulting in a bumbling sword fight scene. After he wins the fight, he heads to the bar just to realize he's too late, and Katie headed to the airport. This, I guess, is their attempt to make Flynn's personal life like Bruce Wayne's, even though nothing he does really requires him to have a secret life. He's just bad at time management. Back at the library, his boss is trying to get the money back before she's told the vase was destroyed. He correctly points out that they could afford it since they literally have a thing that turns things into gold. After a scene where Flynn sees the large exhibit section of the library for the first time, where he finds out they have Noah's Ark and the Fountain of Youth, the head librarian jumps in, tries to let him know about his next mission, but he snaps that they're taking over his life. After he tries to kill himself with Excalibur because he can't get any, they offer him vacation time, which he takes. We're then shown a college class where the professor is teaching about Vlad the Impaler. Once the lecture is over, he's approached by an ex-KGB officer who lets the professor know they've found the body of Vlad the Impaler and something that will lead them to something called the Judas Chalice, and he's going to help them get it. Back with Flynn, Charlene shows up to his apartment drunk and tells him to go out and do something. He talks about his fear of rejection instead. He then has a dream where a hot woman tells him to find her. He then sees that the landmark she was in front of in his dream is in New Orleans. When he gets off the train, a cabbie picks him up and does the Benny from Total Recall routine, telling him all the naughty stuff he can get into there, but is then disappointed when Flynn says he wants to see museums. By the way, for the young viewers, a cab is like an Uber, but more expensive, and you're not paying someone's car payment when you're riding it. Anyway, he ends up in a nightclub where the woman of his dreams just happens to be singing. We also see the professor and Kubitschek arrive there as well. After her performance, Flynn approaches her and seemingly strikes out horribly until she sees the professor and Kubitschek walk in. They spook her and she grabs him and walks off with him to a chapel in the back of the building. Flynn, being annoyingly dense to the situation, starts rambling about the history of chapels and making as much noise as possible. Seriously, even if he doesn't know they're running from people, who goes, "I can hear my voice, let me yell as loud as I can for fun," especially if he's trying to impress a woman. She then tries to tell him about his mission as the librarian, but again, he starts rambling so he doesn't hear a word of it. Kubitschek and his men burst in, looking for whatever they have, which is apparently a map to the chalice, but she distracts them by singing loud enough to break a window, and they escape. The professor finds an outline in wax of the map when Flynn dropped it, and they leave. Once Flynn and the woman are away, they make small talk, and she believed his annoying guy routine was just an act. She tells him to embrace his life instead of running from it, and we get a montage of them hanging out. They eventually kiss, she gets turned on, he takes her back to his hotel, and she throws him around like a rag doll in a fit of passion. When he wakes up the next morning, the singer, who we now know as Simone, is gone and she left him a rose on his bed. He heads to a barbershop where Judson is there, dressed as a blues musician, but then teleports to a bunch of roles during the conversation. They then talk about the Judas Chalice and its connection to vampires. Apparently the chalice can resurrect vampires. He then goes to ask Judson about Simone, but he then disappears into a train, so he doesn't get an answer. Flynn then calls the cab driver to take him to a cemetery where he grabs something hidden in a tombstone, but then gets kidnapped by Kubitschek's men. We then get your standard spy movie scene where the bad guy tells the good guy his entire plan before having his henchmen kill the hero with some method that's time-consuming enough to give the hero time to escape, which is exactly what happens. Flynn then goes to the other room to free the professor, who tries to decipher the coin he found, but Flynn then starts to spaz out from the drugs the bad guys gave him. They do figure out where the chalice is, though, and the professor tells Flynn to leave. Flynn gets to a warehouse where Kubitschek's men corner him. Simone then shows up there, where she basically does the Nightcrawler thing from X-Men, where she poofs to different parts of the room to beat people up, which works until she takes a shotgun bullet for Flynn. Flynn then sets a fire to distract them while he takes off with Simone. He starts crying when he does not feel a pulse, but she recovers and he faints. He wakes up at Simone's house where he points out she was dead, and she points out matter-of-factly that she was already dead because she is a vampire. When he freaks out, she points out she doesn't feed on humans and shows him her blood stash, but does prank him with her fangs. He eventually realizes she's still hot, so he gets okay with the whole doing a 403-year-old woman thing. This then leads to a flashback where she explains how she got that way. Long story short, attacked by a vampire in an alley. From there, she's been the protector of one of the pieces to prevent vampires from being resurrected. He then gets a history lesson about librarians and their connections to vampires, including that Judson is probably immortal. Flynn then takes Simone to the taxi driver Andre, who has a cousin with a boat. They get on a boat to take them to the island they found, but tells Andre not to disturb them until night, and Andre assumes it's because they're going to get it on. Once they arrive, they find a grounded pirate ship. After dodging some traps, they find a treasure chest and eventually the chalice. We then see that the sight of the chalice makes Simone involuntarily fang out. He then says they should leave, but instead he starts rambling, which gives Kubitschek and his men enough time to show up. Big twist when Simone sees the professor, she fangs out and goes to attack him, but she is stopped by Kubitschek holding a cross. He decides to lock Simone and Flynn in the ship together in hopes that Simone eventually feeds on him. After she can't open the door from being too weak, Flynn MacGyvers a bunch of stuff to an old cannon, which he then uses to blast out of the room. When they get back to the dock, they find Andre knocked out. Simone gets on the boat and takes off with it, in time for Andre to fully recover and make a sarcastic quip about Flynn being left. Somehow, Andre and Flynn hitchhike back to New Orleans, so I guess they didn't need a boat to get to wherever they were. Andre gives Flynn a pep talk about trusting himself to find what he's looking for, and he gets going. Back with Simone, we see her grab a couple blood packets from her fridge, which, let's be real, if she was just going home, she could have taken Flynn. Anyway, she heads to the plantation where the Russians are, and Flynn also shows up and decides to take that time to cry about being left. As she's trying to explain that she was trying to protect him, this conversation gives the Russians time to catch them. Seriously, this guy is terrible at whatever his job is. The professor then tells Kubitschek what needs to happen to resurrect Dracula, so they pour Flynn's blood into the chalice before pouring it into the coffin of Dracula, but it then does nothing. We then see the professor drinking from the chalice and laughing. That's when we find out that the professor was actually Dracula the whole time and needed all that to regain his strength. As he feeds on Kubitschek, Simone explains that he's the vampire that turned her. Dracula tries to talk Simone into drinking from the chalice to be one of them, but she turns it down, and now Kubitschek and all his men are vampires that then attack them. Eventually it gets down to Flynn and Dracula one-on-one, and as Dracula has his way with Flynn, Simone shows up and the two have a poof fight. While Flynn is running, he literally knocks himself in the head with a tree that happens to be of the wood that is needed to kill Dracula. He goes back, distracts Dracula with the chalice, and stakes Dracula with the wood, resulting in him burning up. After Dracula's death, Flynn asks Simone to come back to New York with him, but she tells him it's not going to happen because she can finally die in peace. She then asks him to watch the sunrise with her, and he joins her. She tells him she loved him before they kiss, and she turns to ash in a very pretty way, unlike the other vampires. All that is then left is her ring. Normally I hate endings like this, but this guy was so annoying during this movie he doesn't deserve to get the woman at the end. The film ends with Flynn giving Charlene the ring and bringing the chalice to Jobson while telling him he's okay with being the librarian again. He also attempts to out Jobson as 2,000 years old based on what Simone told him, but Jobson acts as if he doesn't know what he's talking about before we see the library being in the shape of the Tree of Knowledge. Thanks for watching. If you like these recaps, please leave a like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to know every time I update. There is now an option to be a channel member where you'll get access to exclusive recaps from late night vampire catalogs like Showtime, Cinemax After Dark, USA Up All Night, and much more. If you want to help my channel grow, please check out my Patreon where members can get exclusive content that can't be uploaded on YouTube along with download options. Link is in the description.